I'm just going to start this episode with a confession. I have failed quite a bit in my life. And those failures are in different categories. I've failed classes. I've failed tests. I've failed making the team. I've failed taking the shot. I've also had moral failures. I got caught cheating on a math test sophomore year of high school. I've probably cheated on girlfriends back when I was really young and stupid. I've cut corners. I've misled people. I have tried to convince people that I was who I wasn't. All those are failures. And here's the deal. I think failure is good, despite all that. Now, I'm not looking to fail. I'm looking to succeed. But what I want as a parent is to learn to guide my kids to have a perspective about failure that's really healthy for them. And what I see quite a bit are families and kids who avoid failure at all costs. In fact, I would say many kids, if you ask them, what have you failed at, would not be able to answer that question because they've had the support around them that keeps them from failure, because they're in a system, whether it's sports or academics, that prevents it. Or, and this is the hardest part, you have a family that just is afraid of it, afraid of failure. So what I want to do in this episode is to talk about why your kid being able to answer the question what they have learned from failure is so critical for their future success. When I was in high school, I declared that I was going to go into finance or accounting. And 6 internships later, an entire college degree, and I burned it to the ground, decided in a moment I was not going to do it. And it felt like a failure. It felt like I was starting from scratch. All that time wasted, all that money spent, all those people I convinced to support me and help me and believe in me, it felt crushing. But eventually it became the springboard for me to discover who I really was and how I really wanted to be in the world. There's a lot of research that's been done on failure. I've got lots of books on it. The Gift of Failure. We're going to get into that a little bit. But I want to ask you this. What have your kids learned from you about failure? Is it okay to fail? Do they know about your failures? Have you told them stories? I've got a list of stories, 19 of them, about specific moments that I would call those were failures. And your perspective matters. How you respond to failure, how you respond when your kid might fail is going to cue for them if failure is okay or not. I would rather you think about failure as a learning opportunity, as mistakes. Psychological safety is this term coined by Amy Edmondson out of Harvard, a researcher. Talks about psychological safety as the really core ingredient for people to be able to grow. And the number one ingredient of psychological safety was when someone can confidently say, it's okay to make mistakes here. I'm in a field of relationships that if I make a mistake, it's okay. People don't panic. People don't think the sky is falling. I don't have parents that think that I've ruined my future and it's never going to be something that gets redeemed. I'm never going to recover. This is it. This is as bad as it gets. And your perspective as a parent and how you respond to those sorts of moments are going to signal and teach your kids if failure is okay or not. And here's what I want you to think about. Without failure, can your kid ever step into their potential? Will your kid take the appropriate level of risk in their life to blaze a trail, to step into their unique identity, to live out their unique purpose and calling, and to build the kinds of relationships that require speaking and saying the truth in love? And those are all the ingredients of a meaningful life. I think your kid learning from failure is critical. Carol Dweck talks about it in this concept of growth mindset. She says, kids who believe intelligence and abilities are fixed often fear failure because they see it as proof they aren't good enough. But when they believe their abilities can grow with effort, failure becomes a teacher rather than a threat. Your perspective on growth matters. How you teach your kids to see tackling a new task, skill, area of knowledge as an opportunity to grow, as actually evidence that you are not done yet, is going to give your kid the message that failure is a learning tool. And that's the foundation from Carol Dweck's research of resilience, of having the capacity to handle more complex challenges. Starts by how you frame, as a parent, your kid's learning. Is it failure? They didn't get a concept? They didn't get the grade that they were hoping for? Or is it a sign that they just haven't figured it out yet? Erik Erikson is the kind of godfather of adolescence and identity formation. He says this: adolescence is the time when kids are figuring out who they are, and failure plays a crucial role. When your kid faces setbacks and reflects on them, they can build a stronger sense of self. Kids need to experience different paths in order to discover their identity. And if going down, quote unquote, the wrong path is terrifying to you as a parent, it's going to prohibit them from actually exploring what eventually would be the right path. And instead, more often than not, they will step into what they feel like they're supposed to, which is the recipe for life disappointment. It's a recipe. It's the start. It's the foundation of a life of wasted potential. Doing what you're supposed to do rather than what you could do and feel called to do. There's this other concept, self-determination theory, that talks about how autonomy and competence and relationships are the three kind of pillars of our psychological core needs. And self-determination theory would say that a part of building autonomy requires an experience of failure many times over. To grow, to recognize that you are ultimately responsible for yourself and your own life, which is a psychological need, they would say. You're going to need to hold the responsibility for something and let it fall out of your hands because you don't know what to do yet. You don't build autonomy without failure. You can't actually support your kids' growth into the maturity of who you want them to become and hope that they do turn into if they don't drop a few eggs along the way. It's hard to make an omelet if you don't crack some eggs, as they say. So here's 3 actionable steps that you can take as a parent to help your kid cultivate an appropriate perspective towards failure, to become someone that has a growth mindset, to become someone that is autonomous in a healthy way, and to help them really understand who they are and how they fit in this world. The first part would be to shift your language from failure to mistakes, from be careful to be aware and be thoughtful. Instead of warning your kids to avoid failure or to cringe if they might, encourage them to approach those challenges with awareness and curiosity. This is going to be interesting. You've never done this before. I'm sure it's going to be tough at first. I'm sure it's going to be rough. Rather than be careful, oh no, to, hey, this is going to be kind of interesting. I'm curious. That's the first part, shifting the language. The second part would be to focus on the process, not the outcome. This is kind of like education 101. How do you praise the effort and problem solving rather than just the outcomes of success? Hey, yeah, it didn't work, but look what you did. Look at what you were able to do. Look at what you were able to stick with. Look at all that you accomplished. Look what you couldn't do last week that you can this week. I know you didn't get the grade you wanted. You didn't make the team. You didn't get the acceptance. But look at the progress that you've made. That actually is important. And you're not trying to convince them that the failure wasn't real, but it's to help them see it's the process that matters. The third part would be to guide them towards reflection, not guide them towards shame. So you help your kid process the mistakes that they've made with open-ended questions like, what surprised you? What would you do differently next time? What do you feel like you're learning as you go through this? Helping them name their emotions and actually put words and labels. Dan Siegel from UCLA calls name it to tame it as an important way to help your kids process their deep emotions. Once they name and actually articulate and put into words the emotions, what's going on the inside, actually neutralizes some of the negative energy that can prevent them from learning. So let's name your emotions. How are you feeling as you go through this? And what are you learning? What do you want to remind yourself for next time? What would you have done differently now in hindsight? And to say it and ask these questions and guide them towards reflection in a really neutral way. Too often, kids are scared of failure. because of not how scary the world is, but because of how scary they think we think the world is. And I understand my kids are my most important project in my entire life, more important than any yard I tend to, more important than any business I try to grow, more important than any accomplishment. It's my kids and who they become. And so there's a lot at risk. I want them to be careful. But a necessary ingredient is for them to make mistakes because that is how they learn. So learning to let go, learning to allow them to make mistakes in middle school and high school and college, and walking alongside them with a non-anxious presence, with curiosity and openness, almost a sense of humor. Like, yeah, I've been there. I know what that feels like. It's not good, but you are learning and you are progressing. Where ultimately your kid will be able to look you in the eye and say, I'm so glad I went through that. Every moral failure I've made, every team I didn't make, every change of direction or job that I quit or got fired from has ultimately turned into my growth. More clarity, more confidence, more sense of responsibility to who I am. And I want that for my kids. So it can feel dangerous, but the danger is actually down the road if we don't allow them to hold the responsibility and the weight of mistakes now. So I want to encourage you to be much more thoughtful this week about how you think about and talk about mistakes, how you think about and reflect on and tell your own stories of failure with your kids, and ultimately to make it normal to think and learn and help them process what they're learning. So you might even ask them every night this week, what mistakes did you make today? Mistakes of omission, mistakes of commission, things you did, things you didn't do, things you wish you had done. Let's just talk about it. And that's a good start of reframing failure, not as failure, but as an opportunity for growth. We'll be back next week with another episode of the U School Podcast.